He was moments away from signing a foreign contract he did not understand, surrounded by executives, cameras, and lies, until the cleaning lady's daughter walked in, uninvited, unnoticed, and unstoppable. What happened next exposed a billion-dollar trap, silenced a boardroom full of power, and rewrote the fate of thousands. This is not just a story about legal fraud. It is about a girl the world tried to overlook who ended up rewriting the rules. Stay with us till the end because one signature almost destroyed everything and one voice saved it all. The conference room smelled of fresh varnish and expensive leather. Outside, the Berlin skyline shimmered beneath a pale winter sun. Inside, silence pressed against the glass walls. I sat at the end of a long mahogany table, the only one without a translator. Tall men in tailored suits watched me. Their smiles were rehearsed. Their documents, thick, typed, and all in German, sat untouched in front of me. I was the outsider. An investor from abroad. The final signature they needed. Their pens were ready. So were their cameras. I tried to make sense of the paragraphs. They had assured me it was routine. Just authorization to begin construction. But I felt a tug in my gut. Something small. Unsettling. I glanced at the bold signatures already stamped across the pages. Each one marked with confidence. The room was too still. Too formal. Even the assistants stood motionless behind their bosses, like statues guarding a trap. I reached for the pen. My fingers brushed the polished metal. And then I heard a sound. Soft brush. From the hallway. Someone had bumped into a cleaning trolley. Heads turned. Murmurs followed. The door cracked open. A middle-aged woman stood there in a gray uniform, eyes wide. She froze. Then from behind her, a girl emerged. No older than 20. Wearing jeans, a red scarf, and holding a worn leather backpack. She stepped into the room as if she had every right to. "Excuse me," she said. In perfect English. All heads snapped toward her. "I think he should know what he is signing," she added, her voice calm. I stared at her. She turned to me. "May I?" she asked. I nodded, unsure whether to feel relieved or alarmed. She walked straight to me, leaned over the table, and scanned the document. Lines moved under her eyes like code through a machine. Then her brows furrowed. "This is not what they said," she said softly. She pointed to a clause near the bottom. My heartbeat quickened. "It transfers majority ownership of your stake to them, once construction begins," she said. My mouth went dry. My hands trembled. I looked up at the men. Their faces were stone. Emotionless. Except one. His lips tightened. He stood and said something sharply in German. The girl replied. Her accent was flawless. Sure. Effortless. Whatever she said made him sit back down. I turned to her again. "Who are you?" I whispered. "My mother works here," she said. She told me what was happening. "I study law. German corporate law." The room was silent again. But this time tense. Cracking. Something powerful had shifted. One of the men began to sweat. The girl pulled out her phone. Snapped photos of the documents. "You might want to take these to your embassy," she said. "I can come with you if you want." I stared at the pages. The lies beneath the paper's gloss. I rose slowly from my chair. The executives protested. One spoke fast, trying to explain. Another reached toward me, attempting calm. But it was too late. The mask had cracked. Their play had been interrupted. By a cleaning lady's daughter. By a voice they never expected to challenge them. I turned to the girl. "What is your name?" I asked. She smiled, but only slightly. "Leah," she replied. "Leah Steinman." She led me out of the room, past the glass walls, past the trembling assistants, past the fake politeness. Down the hallway where her mother waited. Tears welled in the woman's eyes. I nodded to her. She nodded back. With quiet pride. We walked toward the elevator. And I asked the girl, "How did you know?" She pulled out a notebook. It was filled with notes. Dates. Legal articles. Annotations on their firm. "I have been studying this deal since they announced it," she said. "They have done it before. Twice. Different language. Different city. Same tactic." She looked up at me. "They underestimated you. And they ignored me." The elevator doors closed. We descended. But something inside me had risen. A sense of near escape. Of justice narrowly missed. When we stepped onto the street, the cold hit my skin. It was sharp. Cleansing. I looked at her again. "Where did you learn English like that?" "My father," she said. "He was American." The wind caught her scarf. It fluttered like a banner. We crossed the street. Behind us, a glass tower reflected the truth it tried to hide. And the girl beside me? She carried more power than any contract in that building. More truth than all the signatures on that table. And I had almost missed her. Almost. But fate sometimes wears a janitor's uniform and speaks with the calm fire of a daughter who listens and sees and refuses to stay silent. She led me to a nearby cafe. Not a fancy one. Small. Warm. Smelled like cinnamon and ground coffee beans. I sank into a wooden chair, still holding the unsigned contract in my hands. The pages now felt heavier, like they carried the weight of betrayal. Leah ordered tea. Not for herself, but for me. She seemed to know I needed something warm to hold. Her hands never shook. She placed her bag on the floor and sat across from me. You were not the first, she said. Her eyes didn't blink much. I tracked 2 other foreign investors who signed without help. Both lost control of their shares. Took years to untangle it. How did you even hear about this meeting? I asked. She hesitated, then looked out the window. My mother cleans their offices. She overheard your name, saw your photo on the presentation slides. She knows I follow these things, ever since what happened to my father. My chest tightened. What happened to him? She looked down. Then slowly she met my gaze. They tricked him too. Not the same people but the same method. Fine print. Language walls. Legal traps. They took everything. And then he got sick. I was 14. Silence hovered between us like snowfall. Gentle. But impossible to ignore. She reached into her coat pocket and took out a USB drive. This has everything I have been documenting. Every clause they inserted. Every inconsistency. Screen captures. Translations. Legal comparisons. You can take this to your consulate or hire a legal team. I do not care what you do next. But you need to know what you almost gave away. I held the USB like it was a key. A key to a locked room I never knew I had been dragged into. The tea steamed in front of me, untouched. I looked at her again. Her posture was quiet. But there was power behind her stillness. Leah Steinman. A student. A daughter. A legal mind with fire in her voice and heartbreak in her past. She could have stayed silent. She could have walked away. But she stepped into that boardroom like it belonged to her. Because she knew something they did not. Truth walks quietly. But it walks with purpose. And when it enters the room, lies fall apart. I want to help you, I said. Her eyes narrowed, cautious. I am serious, I continued. You want to fight this system? You already started. She leaned back, studied me, then nodded once. I want to work for justice, she said. Not revenge. I want to build a world where language is not a weapon. I looked at her mother's uniform folded under her coat, and I saw it. The strength it took to raise a warrior. One without armor but armed with knowledge. I shook her hand. Firm. Unflinching. Like signing a new kind of contract. One not written on paper, but written in trust. The cafe door opened. Cold wind rushed in. She zipped her coat. And they left together. Mother and daughter. Side by side. I watched them disappear into the streetlight's golden blur. And I knew. That day was supposed to mark a deal. A business triumph. Instead, it marked something far greater. The moment I met the voice that broke the silence. The mind that read between the lines. And the heart that stood between a pen and a trap. That day I almost lost everything. But a cleaner's daughter took control. And gave it all back. Not with noise. But with truth. And the world would never be the same again. 3 days later I was in a courtroom. Not as a defendant. But as a witness. Leah stood beside me. No longer wearing jeans and a scarf. Today she wore a navy blazer. Hair tied back. A black folder pressed to her chest like a shield forged from facts. The courtroom was cold. Echoed with every sound. Journalists filled the back benches. Their pens twitching. Cameras blinking like restless eyes. Across the aisle sat the executives from that glass tower. Still in their suits. But they looked smaller now. Less polished. More exposed. Their lawyer tried to keep the mask on. Tried to twist clauses into misunderstandings. But Leah. She dismantled every sentence. Every line. Every game. When the judge asked questions she answered in 2 languages. Flawless. Precise. Confident. The room was silent when she read aloud the translation of Clause 47. Even the clerk looked up. It was the clause that would have stolen control of my investment. The clause they claimed was standard. The judge adjusted her glasses. Took a deep breath. And looked directly at the executives. Then she turned to Leah. You are not yet a licensed attorney? She asked. Leah shook her head. Still studying, she said. The judge nodded slowly. Then I suggest every law firm in this country take notice. That sentence made headlines the next morning. Student lawyer exposes multinational fraud scheme. Cleaner's daughter shocks Berlin legal world. She refused interviews. Turned down offers. Said the real victory was saving others from the same trap. But I had other plans. I called my firm. Told them about Leah. Told them I wanted to sponsor her education. Fully. Every semester. Every book. Every exam. She refused at first. Said she had not done it for money. I told her, this is not a reward. It is an investment. And you are the safest one I have ever made. She finally agreed. Months passed. She graduated top of her class. Later, I learned she started a legal aid initiative. For immigrants. Workers. Cleaners like her mother. People who signed documents every day without understanding the words. People who had no voice in rooms filled with power. And every time someone asked me how I made my fortune, I told them this story. About a pen I almost lifted. And a girl who lifted something greater. The weight of injustice. I still keep that contract in my office drawer. Unmarked. Inside. A reminder of how close I came to losing everything. And how a quiet voice shattered a corporate empire. Not with power. But with truth. With courage. With clarity. That voice belonged to a young woman no one saw coming. But now the world watches every time she speaks. And I do too. With pride. Because the day she took control was the day everything changed. Forever. 2 years passed. The world had changed. But Leah had changed more. Not in appearance. Not in voice. But in gravity. She now carried weight wherever she walked. Legal firms whispered her name in conference rooms. Policymakers invited her to panels. But she kept her distance. She stayed grounded. Always returning to the small flat where her mother still lived. Always taking the same tram across Berlin, where strangers smiled at her without knowing why. She had just opened her first legal center. Small. 2 rooms. 1 printer. No gold plates on the wall. Just a handwritten sign taped to the glass. Know before you sign. Clients poured in. Waiters. Cleaners. Delivery drivers. Refugees. Each with a letter they could not read, a contract they feared, or a signature they regretted. She greeted each one like they mattered. Because they did. To her they were not files. They were stories. And every time she sat across from them, she remembered that day in the boardroom. The day she raised her voice for the first time and watched powerful men go silent. But not everyone celebrated her. There were whispers. Threats. Letters with no return addresses. Emails from anonymous partners suggesting she should back off. One evening she returned to her office and found the front window cracked. Not shattered. But just enough to send a message. Her mother was frightened. But Leah? She stood in front of the crack the next morning, ran her fingers across the glass, and then quietly replaced the sign. The new one read, "If you try to silence the voice, we will teach thousands to speak." And they did. She started free evening classes. Legal literacy for the working class. The first night, 12 people showed up. Within weeks, the room overflowed. Baristas, janitors, construction workers sat side by side, learning the language that once threatened to bury them. And then came the case that changed everything again. A multinational tech company had been forcing warehouse workers to sign waivers after accidents. The documents were in technical German. Workers signed, believing it was for compensation. In truth, it absolved the company of all responsibility. One of the injured was a single father named Imran. He had 2 broken ribs and a crushed wrist. No health coverage. No justice. Until someone handed him a flyer. Leah took his case. Her investigation exposed a systemic pattern. Hundreds of injuries. Dozens of silenced voices. All protected by legal fog and corporate firewalls. But fog cannot hold against a rising sun. And firewalls collapse when truth kicks in the door. She filed a civil class action. The largest of its kind in that region. The press caught on. So did lawmakers. And once again, she stood in court. Different room. Different crowd. Same fire. When the company's legal team tried to dismiss the case, she brought out every clause. Every signature. And this time she did not just read them aloud. She translated them. Line by line. Word by word. Not just for the judge. But for the workers in the gallery. So they would know. So they would understand what they had once signed in darkness. And when the judge ruled in their favor, there was no cheer. Just silence. Emotional. like the silence after a long storm. She turned to the gallery. Men and women with tired eyes, bandaged hands, scarred legs. They were not crying. They were standing and nodding, as if something inside them had finally been heard. That evening, as the sun dipped behind Berlin's rooftops, Leah walked back to her office. No fanfare. No headlines. Just footsteps on pavement. A pigeon fluttered past her shoulder. The air smelled like rain. She pushed open the office door and stepped inside. And paused. Her mother stood there, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. "I saw you on the news," she said softly. Leah smiled. "I did not say much." "You never have to," her mother replied. And then she whispered, "You already said enough the day you walked into that room for him." Leah walked to the desk, sat down, opened a fresh file. The next client waited outside. But this time, they were not afraid. They knew what they were signing up for, because she had shown them that silence was a choice, and knowledge was a weapon. And justice? Justice wears no robe, no title, no crown. Sometimes, it simply walks in wearing a red scarf and a backpack, and rewrites the ending, one voice at a time. Months later, a letter arrived, stamped with the blue emblem of the United Nations. Its corners were stiff, the paper thick. Leah opened it at her kitchen table. Her mother sipped tea beside her, peeling potatoes. The letter was short, direct. They were inviting her to Geneva, to speak at the World Conference on Labor Rights and Corporate Ethics. The theme: Voices from the Ground. She read it twice, then looked up. Her mother's hands had paused. "You are going," she said softly without looking. Leah exhaled, folded the letter carefully, and nodded. 2 weeks later, she stood in a grand marble hall. Flags from every nation swayed silently above her. She wore a plain black suit. No jewelry, no makeup, just her voice, and the scars of stories no one had ever wanted to hear. She waited behind the curtain. A man in a silk tie whispered to her, "You will have 10 minutes. Please keep it diplomatic." She looked at him once, then at the trembling hands of a garment worker waiting her turn behind her. She stepped onto the stage. The hall was silent. Delegates in crisp suits adjusted their earpieces. Translators hovered behind glass walls. Cameras rolled. She did not start with greetings. She began with names. Fatima, Carlos, Imran, Maria. She spoke of the people behind the policies, of the fine print that had broken families, destroyed homes, and erased savings. She told them about the cracked window, the letter without a sender, the day her mother was nearly fired for raising a daughter who spoke up. She held nothing back. She did not raise her voice, but it carried. Through velvet curtains, through marble columns, through translation booths and headlines. When she finished, no one clapped. Not at first. They simply sat, frozen, like something sacred had just passed through the room. And then, one delegate stood, then another, then the whole room. Not clapping, just standing, silent, like they understood that applause would not be enough. Outside, reporters flooded her with questions. How did she stay calm? What was her next step? Would she accept the proposal to join the International Legal Reform Board? Her answer was simple. No. I will not join another table. I will build new ones. For people who were never invited to sit. Back in Berlin, her office had tripled in size. Donations poured in. Volunteers lined the hall. Law students from across Europe asked to apprentice under her. But she kept her schedule. Simple. Focused. She still met with every client. Still taught classes twice a week. Still rode the same tram. Then one day, a letter came not for her, but for her mother. A small envelope. From the German Order of National Merit. Read. In honor of raising a daughter who changed the lives of thousands. Her mother held the letter like it was glass. Leah framed it. Hung it beside the cracked window glass they had saved from that night long ago. Below it, a plaque. Truth enters quietly, but it leaves nothing as it was. And as night fell across Berlin, her office lights remained on. Another file opened. Another story heard. The world had offered her titles, platforms, power. But she had chosen something else. Presence. The kind that sits beside the wounded. Reads the lines they were meant to ignore. And tells them with no ceremony, you are not alone anymore. Because Leah Steinman, the cleaning lady's daughter, had not just translated contracts. She had translated silence into movement, oppression into memory, and justice into action. One signature at a time. Years had passed. The glass towers still shimmered above the Berlin skyline. Contracts were still signed. Deals were still made. But something had shifted in the undercurrent. A whisper of resistance. A name passed from worker to worker, office to office, city to city. Leah Steinman. She had become more than a person. She had become a presence. Her name stood for vigilance. For language reclaimed. For truth made visible. And yet, she never sought the spotlight. Her greatest victories were quiet. Like the single mother who kept her apartment after reading her lease with new eyes. Or the factory worker who walked out of arbitration with dignity intact. Or the boy who once believed legal words were weapons, until Leah taught him they were tools. One spring morning, she stood alone before a blank wall. Fresh paint. A new building. A new beginning. The legal aid center she had dreamed of for years was finally real. 4 floors. Free clinics. Translation rooms. A classroom named after her mother. But there was one thing left to do. One final line to sign. She stepped forward. Took the pen. And on a stone plaque just inside the entrance she wrote her name. Not in cursive. But in firm block letters. Simple. Unflinching. Under it a single quote. Do not sign away your power. Learn the words. Raise your voice. The ink dried in silence. Birdsong drifted in from the open door. Outside a crowd had gathered. Not for applause. Not for cameras. Just to witness. She turned. Her mother stood at the front. Gray now threaded her hair. But her eyes were bright. Pride shimmering behind soft lines. Leah stepped down and hugged her tightly. No words. None needed. And as the first clients walked into the center, some carrying papers, some carrying fear, they saw a woman who had once been like them, and knew they were safe, because the girl who once crashed a boardroom without invitation had built a building with open doors for all. And that was the only signature that ever truly mattered. The one written in courage. The one written in service. The one written in the hearts of those who now understood their own power. The story had begun with silence, but it ended with voices, with understanding, with justice, and with a daughter who made the world listen.